Hello, we are Group 2, and our research topic was sleep quality and quantity. I'm Natalie Vargas.
I'm Lainey Simons.
Ponce Braga.
We have organized this presentation into 4 parts to break down our project. First, we will give a background on our survey, and then we will discuss the methods of data collection. The third and fourth parts of the presentation will consist of analyzing the results to our research questions and a conclusion.
The background information includes an overview of our topic and the research questions. Our topic for our group was sleep quality and sleep quantity. Sleep quality is the measurement of how well you are sleeping through the night, while sleep quantity is how much you sleep through the night. Each of our research questions were aimed to see how well and how long Ohio State students sleep each night, even with their rigorous course loads. Research question 1 was, does mental stress from a heavy school workload relate to sleep quantity among OSU students? And it asks how much students feel they sleep at night, which we quantified in self-reported hours, even with the stress on them throughout their academic year. We reported mental stress from school workload by the number of credit hours the respondents are currently enrolled in. Research question 2, does mental stress from a heavy school workload relate to quality among OSU students? Asks how well the students are sleeping throughout their nights here at Ohio State. We figured this out by using the credit hours again and comparing that to the students' self-reported sleep quality. Research question 3, does sleep quality have an association with academic performance among OSU students? Aims to link how important a good night's rest is on students' grades. In this question, we compared the respondents' GPA and their sleep quality. All of these are important questions to measure the link between sleep quality and quantity in Ohio State students.
Our data came from a software company called Qualtrics. The software we used made it easier for us to distribute the survey, and collect data that was appropriate for our cross-sectional survey. Through the software, we were able to create a 15-question survey that correlated to sleep quantity and sleep quality. After that, we were able to distribute the link of our survey to get the target population of Ohio State students by using platforms like GroupMe, Carmen, and email in order to get the maximum amount of respondents. We wanted to get a variety of responses in our survey, so each of us decided to email every Ohio State students in all of our current classes. GroupMe is an app that is filled with Ohio State students, and by sending the link on there, it made it easier because people were able to show their excitement for the survey by liking the link. Our results could also be generalized to all college students nationwide. By promoting the survey through these different platforms, we received a total of 264 respondents, and we had enough statistical information and enough data collected to then start running hypothesis tests. The mechanisms for data collection was a cross-sectional study that included one open-ended question, many closed-ended multiple choice questions, and a scaled question. In fact, we used a computer programming called RStudio for statistical computing and tests. By using RStudio, we were able to use Fisher's exact test as well as the ANOVA test to determine if there was an association or no association between sleep quantity and credit hours school-related work from our sample. We recorded a range of characteristics pertaining to femininity and masculinity. And our gender demographics, we were able to collect the gender percentages from our sample. Based on the results, we found that there were 37.12% of males who took the survey, 59.85% of females were female respondents, 2.27% were non-binary students, meaning that they are neither male or female, and 0.76% preferred not to say their gender. Overall, it is clear that majority of the sample were made up of female respondents, and because the results reported that out of 264 respondents, 158 were in fact females.
Two other demographics we were able to look at were age and race. The average age in our population was 21.09 years old. The standard deviation from this mean was 6.38. For race, we gave respondents 5 distinct choices and included a 6th option labeled other if their race was not listed. Respondents were only able to choose one answer. The graph on the right of the slide breaks down the race demographics of our survey. As you can see, a majority of respondents, about 68.56%, were white. The next largest group were Asian, which was 14.77% of our respondents. 11.74% were Black or African American, and 0.76% were Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander. 11 people were a race not defined in the survey, which amounted to 4.17% of the population.
For our enrollment demographics, our findings were that 2.65% were less than full-time students, 54.17% were full-time students enrolled in 12 to 15 credit hours, 41.67% were also full-time students enrolled in 16 to 18 credit hours, and 1.52% were overtime students exceeding the 18 credit hours. Out of the 264 respondents, 253 were full-time students. Based on the results, we were able to conclude that majority of our sample population were in fact full-time students, equalizing up to 95.84% of the whole sample.
Our first research question was, does mental stress from a heavy school workload relate to sleep quantity among OSU students? We found that in our sample, there was not a significant association between perceived sleep quantity and the number of credit hours a student at OSU is enrolled in. This result was found from conducting Fisher's exact test, using answers from the survey asking how many hours of sleep one gets per school night and how many credit hours they are taking. These questions were multiple choice. We used Fisher's test because sleep quantity and credit hours were both categorical variables. We found a p-value of 0.6327, which means that we would fail to reject the null hypothesis, which was that there is no association between these two variables.
These are the results for our first research question correlating to mental stress from a heavy school workload and its relation to sleep quantity. The graph shows the number of the respondents on the y-axis and the hours of sleep each respondent received on school nights on the x-axis. For example, the table on the left showed that very few of less than full-time students received 6 to 7 hours of sleep, and some received 8 hours of sleep per school night. The graph in the middle shows that just over 75 respondents who are full-time students averages 6 to 7 hours of sleep, while a few only got 2 to 4 hours of sleep and some got 8 hours of sleep. The graph on the right is when we see a significant change in the hours of sleep that overtime students received on each school night. We were able to conclude that in our sample, it is evident that full-time students received a reasonable amount of sleep compared to less than full-time students and overtime students, because there isn't enough evidence that correlates with sleep quantity and credit hours, so the results are statistically insignificant.
Research question 2 was, does mental stress from a heavy school workload relate to sleep quality among Ohio State students? Our hypotheses were, for the null, that there is no association between sleep quality and the number of times per week OSU students are stressed about school-related work. And our alternative was that there is an association between sleep quality and the number of times per week OSU students are stressed about school-related work. And because our variables were credit hours versus self-reported sleep quality, these are both categorical data, so we could use Fisher's exact test. This test gave us a p-value of 0.004935. With that being said, the data was significant, and we reject the null hypothesis, so there is an association. In our sample, there was a significant difference between perceived sleep quality and the number of times per week OSU students are stressed about school-related work. Of the 135 respondents that described their sleep as poor or fair, 101 worried about school 6 or more times a week at 75%. 32 worried about school 1 to 5 times a week at 24%, and 2 worried 0 times about school during the week, 1%. Of the 85 respondents that described their sleep as good, 58 worried about school 6 or more times a week at 68%. 26 worried about school 1 to 5 times a week at 31%, and 1 respondent worried about school 0 times a week for 1%. Lastly, of the 44 OSU students that described their sleep as very good or excellent, 20 worried about school 6 or more times a week at 45%, 23 worried about school 1 to 5 times a week, 52%, and 1 person worried about school 0 times a week, 3%. And so for this research question, we were equating mental stress from a heavy school workload to how many times someone worries throughout their week about school. We compared the worrying to the self-reported sleep quality, which could have been replied to by poor, fair, good, very good, or excellent. To make the data simpler, we put poor and fair in one category and put very good and excellent together as well. Those were the overarching categories for the histograms shown above. From there, the amount of times the respondents worried were on the x-axis. The frequency on the y-axis is the number of respondents for each category. Because our data was significant, we can say there is an association between worry and sleep quality. The first part of the graph under poor/fair sleep shows that people who worry often sleep worse. As self-reported sleep quality goes up, the amount of times one worries goes down. This is especially shown when we look at the histogram on the far right, where the highest category of worrying is lower than all of the rest, while the sleep quality is the best in this category.
Our third and final research question asked if sleep quality had an association with academic performance among OSU students. GPA was used to measure academic performance in the survey, and respondents were able to input their exact GPA. For this question, we used an ANOVA test since we had to make multiple comparisons between groups. For example, we compared the mean GPA of those who ranked their sleep as poor or fair to the mean GPA of those who rate their sleep as good. Then, those who rated their sleep as poor or fair would also be compared to those who rated their sleep as very good or excellent. For our hypothesis, we used mu sub 1, 2, and 3 to represent the average mean GPAs for those who classified their sleep as these. The graph on the next slide will better summarize the groups. The null hypothesis was that the mean GPA between all of these groups was equal. The alternative hypothesis is that at least one mean varied from the others. In our sample, we found that there were no significant differences in mean GPA by how well a student sleeps on school nights. The ANOVA test showed that the p-value was 0.3753. The coefficient of determination was 0.007482. These results were found with the degrees of freedom equal to 2. Since there were no significant results found between any of the groups, we did not have to run Tukey's test.
So in this comparison, we had sleep quality running across the x-axis and GPA on the y-axis. The median GPA for all levels of sleep quality was 3.6. However, we did have to exclude 5 values from the box plots because their GPA was over the 4.0 scale, which is not possible at Ohio State. The poor or fair sleep quality showed the largest variance in GPA, shown by the largest box. The plots show that as sleep quality improves, the GPA seems to improve as well. We can tell this from the median GPA from each level of sleep quality, shown by the dark line in the middle of the boxes. Overall, higher GPA was shown with better sleep quality, but since the ANOVA test came back with a p-value over 0.05, the data was not significant, so we could not use this information to link sleep quality to better GPA.
To conclude, only one of the 3 hypothesis tests ran showed significant results. This was research question 2, which showed association between quality of sleep and stress from a heavy school workload. Our survey did initially consist of other questions, including if lights were kept on throughout the night, if the individual slept with a roommate, and club and out of school involvement level. These variables could have also impacted stress and sleep levels of those surveyed, but obviously would not be shown in our results. More hypothesis tests would need to be run to see if there are any associations between these and sleep quantity and quality. It should also be noted that a sampling bias may have occurred based on how we collected our data. As previously stated, we used Carmen email and GroupMe to encourage others to take our survey. Since through these, we only contacted people in our classes, that leaves out a large portion of Ohio State students. That concludes our presentation, and thank you for listening.
Hi, my name is Kaya, and our presentation is about sleep quality and quantity. So the first thing I'm going to talk about are the gender demographics. The gender percentages from our sample indicates that the majority of our respondents were female. Given the percentage of 59.85%, and out of 264 respondents, 158 of these respondents were females. The remaining demographics show that 37.12% were male, 2.27 are non-binary, which are either male or female, and lastly, 0.76% prefer not to announce their gender. Overall, we can clearly see that females were the major respondents. So next, we're going to move on to results for research question 2. Research question 2 asks, does mental stress from a heavy school workload relate to sleep quality among OSU students? The test used for this question is the Fisher's exact test because the variables were categorical data. The null hypothesis is that there is no association between sleep and the number of times per week OSU students are stressed out about school-related work. The alternative hypothesis is that there is actually an association between sleep quality and the number of times per week OSU students are stressed out about school-related work. After the test was performed, we obtained a p-value of 0.004935. This p-value is clearly smaller than the alpha level, which is 0.05. Thus, we reject the null hypothesis. This means that the results are significant and there is an association. Next, let's move on to the conclusion of these results. To conclude these results, only one of the 3 of these tests were found significant, which was question 2. This showed an association between perceived sleep quality and the number of times per week Ohio State students are stressed out about school-related workload with the p-value of 0.004935. Research question 1 and 3 were found non-significant. Note that both of these p-values are larger than the alpha level 0.05. Other variables that could have impacted stress and sleep levels are questions like if the lights were kept on at night, if they had a roommate present, and other outside school activities like clubs. But other hypothesis tests would have to be performed to see any association between these variables I just mentioned in sleep quantity and quality. Also, sampling bias could have occurred since we only contacted students within our classes by using GroupMe and Carmen email. Because of this leaves out a large proportion of other OSU students. So with that being said, this concludes our presentation, and thank you for your time. Take care.